Imagine discovering that your most fundamental beliefs about reality might be wrong. Picture yourself encountering ideas so profound they change how you see everything. Paradoxes that challenge the very fabric of what you think you know. These aren't just clever puzzles or philosophical riddles. They're gateways to understanding the deepest mysteries of existence, consciousness, and the universe itself. As you journey through these mind-bending paradoxes, you'll find yourself questioning everything you thought was certain, and in that questioning lies the potential for profound transformation. Think about your daily life, the choices you make, the things you believe, the way you understand cause and effect. Now imagine discovering that these basic assumptions might be built on shifting sands. What if the most logical answer isn't always the right one? What if the simplest truths contain hidden contradictions that, once revealed, change everything you thought you knew? This is the power of paradox, the ability to show us that reality is far stranger and more fascinating than we ever imagined. As we explore these life-changing paradoxes together, you'll encounter ideas that have puzzled the greatest minds throughout history. You'll discover how seemingly impossible contradictions can lead to deeper truths. From the nature of time and existence to the complexities of human consciousness and decision-making, each paradox offers a unique window into the mysteries that surround us. But these aren't just abstract ideas. Each paradox we'll explore has practical implications for how you live your life, make decisions, and understand your place in the universe. They challenge not just what you think, but how you think. They reveal the limitations of human logic while simultaneously showcasing the remarkable ability of the human mind to grapple with complex ideas that seem to defy reason itself. As you listen and drift towards sleep, let these paradoxes work their magic on your mind. Let them challenge your assumptions, expand your thinking, and open new pathways of understanding. Some might comfort you with their strange logic, while others might unsettle your most basic assumptions about reality. All of them have the power to change how you see the world. Consider the possibility that time isn't what you think it is. That choice might be an illusion, that the very act of observing something changes its nature. These aren't just philosophical musings. They're insights backed by science, mathematics, and centuries of human thought. They're paradoxes that have the power to reshape your understanding of everything, from your daily choices to the nature of the universe itself. Think of this journey through paradox as a form of mental exploration, where each new idea builds upon the last, creating a tapestry of interconnected insights that challenge and expand your understanding. These aren't just puzzles to be solved. They're doorways to new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing, and new ways of being in the world. As we begin this journey together, prepare yourself for ideas that might seem impossible at first glance, but reveal profound truths upon deeper reflection. Some will challenge your logic, others will test your intuition, and all will leave you with a richer, more nuanced understanding of reality. These paradoxes have the power to change lives because they don't just add to what you know. They transform how you think. They reveal the complexity hidden within simplicity, the uncertainty lurking beneath certainty, and the profound mysteries that exist in even the most ordinary aspects of existence. Let these thoughts wash over you as you prepare for sleep, knowing that each paradox you encounter has the potential to shift your perspective in ways both subtle and profound. Some insights might come immediately, while others might reveal themselves slowly in dreams or quiet moments of reflection. Welcome to a journey through the most transformative paradoxes ever conceived. Ideas that have the power to change not just what you think, but how you think about everything in your world. Consider what happens when infinity meets reality in your own backyard. Picture yourself standing in a garden, holding a simple mirror that faces another mirror. Between these two reflective surfaces, an endless corridor of images stretches into seeming infinity. Yet something strange occurs. If you look closely enough, at some point, the reflections fade into darkness. This is the reflection paradox, a gateway into understanding how infinity collides with the physical limitations of our world. At first glance, it seems like a simple optical effect, something you might have played with as a child. Two mirrors facing each other should create an infinite number of reflections, each one slightly smaller than the last, continuing forever. But in reality, this infinity has a limit. Light itself, the very thing making these reflections possible, can only bounce back and forth so many times before it diminishes beyond visibility. This contradiction between the theoretical, endless reflections and the practical limitations of light opens the door to profound questions about the nature of infinity itself. The reflection paradox challenges our understanding of what's possible in the physical world. Mathematically, the reflections should continue forever, creating an infinite regression of images. Yet physically, they don't. This isn't just about mirrors and light. It's about the fundamental gap between perfect mathematical concepts and the messy reality of our physical universe. Think about what this means for other aspects of our world. How many other infinities do we assume exist, only to find they break down when confronted with physical reality? The paradox reveals a crucial truth, that the abstract concepts we use to understand the universe don't always align perfectly with the universe itself. This disconnect between theory and reality appears throughout science and philosophy. When physicists try to understand the smallest possible unit of space or time, they run into similar paradoxes. In theory, you should be able to divide space and time infinitely. But at the quantum level, this breaks down. There's a smallest possible unit, the Planck length and Planck time, beyond which our conventional understanding of reality ceases to make sense. The implications ripple outward into every field of human knowledge. In economics, theorists talk about infinite growth on a finite planet. In computer science, programmers grapple with the limits of processing power when modeling theoretically infinite systems. Each instance reveals the same fundamental tension between our capacity to imagine infinity and the physical constraints of our universe. But the reflection paradox offers more than just a lesson about physical limitations. It invites us to consider how we know what we know. When you look into those facing mirrors, at what point do you decide the reflections have stopped? Is it when you can no longer see them? Or do they continue beyond your ability to perceive them? This raises questions about the relationship between existence and observation. Does something cease to exist simply because we can't detect it? These questions resonate with recent discoveries in quantum physics, where the act of observation itself appears to influence the behavior of particles. The reflection paradox, in its simple, everyday manifestation, points toward these deeper mysteries about the nature of reality and our role in observing it. Moreover, this paradox challenges our assumptions about perfection and ideals. The mathematical concept of infinite reflections represents a kind of perfection, pure, endless, unbounded. But the physical reality, with its gradual dimming and eventual fading, reminds us that we live in a world of limitations and constraints. This tension between ideal and real appears throughout human experience, from our personal aspirations to our social structures. Understanding the reflection paradox can change how you view the world around you. It teaches us to look more carefully at situations where we assume something continues indefinitely. It reminds us that physical reality often imposes unexpected limitations on theoretical possibilities. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that these limitations aren't flaws in the universe. They're essential features that help define the nature of reality itself. As you contemplate this paradox, consider how it might apply to your own life. How often do you assume something can continue indefinitely, only to discover natural limits? How might recognizing these limits change your approach to problems and challenges? The paradox invites us to embrace both the beauty of infinite possibility and the practical constraints that shape our existence. Let's explore how the boundaries between reality and perception blur when we examine consciousness itself. Imagine you're dreaming right now, a vivid, detailed dream where everything feels absolutely real. In this dream, you question whether you're actually dreaming, and you convince yourself that you're awake. But here's where it gets interesting. How do you know, right now, that you're not in that exact situation? This is the consciousness paradox, a puzzle that challenges our most basic assumptions about awareness and reality. Consider the last time you realized you were dreaming while still inside the dream, a phenomenon known as lucid dreaming. In that moment, you were conscious enough to recognize the dream state, yet still experiencing the dream reality. This creates a fascinating contradiction. You were simultaneously the observer who knew it was a dream and the participant fully immersed in the dream world. This dual state of consciousness reveals something profound about the nature of awareness itself. Preparing and narrating this theory took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the theory. The consciousness paradox deepens when we consider how we verify our own awareness. Traditional wisdom suggests that I think, therefore I am. The idea that our ability to question our existence proves we exist. But what if the very thoughts we use to confirm our consciousness are themselves part of an elaborate illusion? Every night in our dreams, we think, reason, and feel with complete conviction, only to wake up and realize those thoughts were part of the dream narrative. This raises unsettling questions about the nature of our waking consciousness. When you're dreaming, the dream feels absolutely real, complete with logical explanations for any inconsistencies you might notice. Your dreaming mind creates elaborate justifications for impossible events, and you accept them completely until you wake up. So, how can you be certain that your current state of consciousness isn't operating under similar illusions? The paradox becomes even more complex when we consider memory and continuity of consciousness. Think about how dreams can feel like they last for hours, or even days, yet occur during much shorter periods of actual sleep. Time itself becomes fluid and unreliable. This distortion of temporal experience raises questions about how we perceive time in our waking life. Is our sense of time's flow equally subjective? Are we experiencing time as it truly is, or only as our consciousness constructs it? Modern neuroscience adds another layer to this paradox. Research shows that our brains often make decisions seconds before we become consciously aware of making them. Our sense of being the author of our own thoughts and actions might itself be a kind of retrospective illusion, a story we tell ourselves after the fact. This suggests that consciousness might be more like a witness to our experiences rather than their creator. The implications extend beyond philosophy into practical questions about identity and self-awareness. If our consciousness can be so thoroughly convinced by dreams, what other aspects of our reality might be equally constructed? Our memories, beliefs, and sense of self? How much of what we consider fundamentally us might be as ephemeral as a dream? This paradox invites us to question the very foundation of how we experience reality. Just as a dream can include false memories that seem to explain how you arrived in the dream situation, our waking consciousness might be creating continuity and meaning where none inherently exists. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are and why we do what we do might be sophisticated narratives created by our minds to make sense of experiences that are far more mysterious. Yet this uncertainty doesn't have to be unsettling. Instead, it can open us to a deeper appreciation of the mystery of consciousness. Just as a lucid dreamer can maintain awareness while experiencing the dream state, we can learn to observe our waking consciousness with greater clarity and curiosity. This paradox teaches us to hold our certainties more lightly, to remain open to the possibility that reality might be far different from what we assume. The consciousness paradox reminds us that the nature of awareness itself might be the greatest mystery we face. It suggests that understanding consciousness isn't just about studying the brain or mapping neural networks. It's about grappling with fundamental questions about the nature of experience, reality, and self-awareness. Within the fabric of time itself lies a question that challenges everything we think we know about cause and effect. Picture yourself holding a device that can send messages to the past. You decide to send tomorrow's weather forecast back to yourself today. When you receive it, you deliberately choose to make it incorrect by doing something different. Yet if you changed the forecast, how could you have sent it in the first place? This is the message paradox, a puzzle that reveals the deep contradictions lurking within our understanding of time and causality. At its core, the message paradox exposes a fundamental conflict in how we think about free will and determinism. If you receive information from the future, are you truly free to act differently than what was foretold? If you do act differently, you create a contradiction. The information you received must have been both true because you received it and false because you changed it. This impossibility suggests something profound about the nature of time and choice. Consider the implications more deeply. Imagine receiving a message warning you about a mistake you'll make tomorrow. Armed with this knowledge, you carefully avoid making that mistake. But if you never made the mistake, what prompted the future version of you to send the warning? The very act of preventing the mistake eliminates the reason for sending the message in the first place. This creates a circular causality that seems to violate our most basic understanding of how events should unfold. The paradox becomes even more perplexing when we consider the nature of information itself. Information, whether it's a weather forecast or a warning about a future mistake, must come from somewhere. It can't simply appear out of nothing. Yet, in the message paradox, the information seems to exist in a closed loop with no clear point of origin. It's as if it's caught in an eternal circle, each instance both causing and being caused by the other. This contradiction forces us to question our assumptions about cause and effect. We typically think of time as flowing in one direction, with causes preceding effects. But the message paradox suggests that this linear understanding might be too simplistic. Perhaps causality is more complex than we imagine, with effects sometimes influencing their own causes in ways we don't yet understand. Modern physics adds another layer of complexity to this paradox. Einstein's theory of relativity suggests that time isn't absolute. It can stretch, compress, and even loop back on itself under certain conditions. Some solutions to Einstein's equations allow for closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that return to their starting point. This raises the possibility that paradoxes like the message paradox might not just be philosophical puzzles, but actual features of our universe. Yet there's something even more profound at stake here. The message paradox challenges our very notion of truth and consistency. If you can change the future that was foretold, then the message wasn't true. But if the message wasn't true, how could it have informed your decision to change the future? This logical loop suggests that either our concept of truth needs revision, or there are fundamental limits to what kinds of information can exist. This has practical implications for how we think about prediction and free will. In our daily lives, we constantly make decisions based on predictions about the future, from weather forecasts to financial projections. The message paradox suggests that perfect prediction might be impossible, not just because of practical limitations, but because of fundamental logical contradictions in the nature of information and causality. Moreover, this paradox raises questions about the relationship between knowledge and reality. Does knowing about a future event automatically change that event? If so, what does this tell us about the nature of knowledge and its role in shaping reality? These questions extend beyond time travel scenarios into everyday situations where predictions and expectations influence outcomes. The message paradox also connects to deeper questions about determinism and free will. If the future can send messages to the past, is the future already determined? Or does our ability to change the predicted future prove that time is more fluid than we imagine? This tension between determination and choice lies at the heart of many philosophical debates about human agency and the nature of time itself. Let's explore a paradox that emerges from our deepest attempts to understand knowledge itself. Imagine you're an expert in your field, perhaps the world's foremost authority on a particular subject. As you study more, making new discoveries and gaining deeper insights, you begin to realize just how much there is yet to learn. With each new piece of knowledge, the boundary of what you don't know seems to expand. This is the knowledge paradox, where greater understanding reveals ever larger territories of uncertainty. Ancient scholars first glimpsed this paradox in their pursuit of wisdom. The philosopher Socrates famously declared that he was wise precisely because he knew that he knew nothing. This wasn't mere humility. It was a profound recognition that true knowledge brings with it an awareness of our own limitations. As our sphere of understanding expands, so too does our awareness of what lies beyond that sphere. Think of knowledge as a circle drawn on an infinite plane. The area inside the circle represents what we know, while everything outside represents what we don't know. As the circle grows larger, as we learn more, its circumference also grows larger. This means that our point of contact with the unknown actually increases as we become more knowledgeable. The more we learn, the more questions we discover waiting to be answered. This paradox manifests in every field of human inquiry. Scientists making groundbreaking discoveries often find that each answer raises 10 new questions. Medical researchers developing treatments for diseases encounter increasingly complex interactions they hadn't anticipated. Philosophers addressing age-old questions uncover deeper layers of complexity beneath their initial solutions. Consider how this plays out in real life. When you first begin learning about any subject, everything seems relatively simple and straightforward. Basic principles appear to explain most of what you observe. But as your understanding deepens, you start to notice exceptions, special cases, and underlying complexities that weren't apparent at first. What once seemed like a complete picture reveals itself to be just the surface of a much deeper reality. The knowledge paradox challenges our traditional view of learning as a straightforward accumulation of facts and skills. Instead, it suggests that true knowledge is more like an ever-expanding awareness of our own ignorance. This isn't a discouraging message. Rather, it's an invitation to approach learning with humility and wonder. Modern information technology has given this paradox new relevance. With vast amounts of information at our fingertips, we might expect to feel more knowledgeable than ever. Instead, many people feel overwhelmed by how much there is to know. Each new piece of information connects to countless others, creating an endless web of interrelated concepts and ideas. This paradox also has profound implications for expertise and authority. True experts often express more uncertainty about their field than novices do. This isn't because they know less, it's because they understand enough to grasp the full complexity of their subject. They've reached what we might call informed uncertainty, where knowledge leads not to absolute certainty, but to a more sophisticated appreciation of complexity. The implications extend into personal growth and self-awareness. As we learn more about ourselves, we often discover new aspects of our personality, new influences on our behavior, new potentials we hadn't recognized before. The process of self-discovery never reaches a final destination. Instead, it continues to reveal new territories for exploration. Perhaps most importantly, the knowledge paradox teaches us something about the nature of wisdom itself. True wisdom might not lie in accumulating more and more knowledge, but in developing a deeper appreciation for the vastness of what we don't know. It suggests that the most profound understanding comes not from claiming certainty, but from remaining open to wonder and possibility. Consider a moment when you tried to create the perfect experience. Perhaps it was a special celebration, a long-awaited vacation, or even just a quiet evening at home. You planned everything meticulously, anticipated every detail, Yet somehow, the very act of trying to make it perfect made it feel less authentic, less perfect. This is the perfection paradox, where the pursuit of perfection itself becomes the very thing that prevents us from achieving it. Let's explore this through a simple yet profound example. Imagine a photographer trying to capture the perfect sunset. She positions herself carefully, adjusts her camera settings, and waits for the exact right moment. But in her intense focus on capturing the perfect shot, she misses the actual experience of the sunset, the warmth on her skin, the gentle shift of colors in the sky, the peaceful transition from day to night. The very act of trying to perfectly preserve the moment prevents her from fully experiencing it. This paradox appears in countless areas of life. Consider the parent who, wanting to give their child the perfect childhood, schedules every moment with enriching activities and educational opportunities. Yet in this pursuit of perfection, they might inadvertently rob their child of the unstructured time and natural discoveries that make childhood magical. The very effort to create perfection creates its opposite. The perfection paradox reveals something profound about the nature of human experience and satisfaction. When we strive for perfection, we often create a rigid framework that leaves no room for the unexpected moments that often bring the greatest joy. It's like trying to script spontaneity. The very attempt contradicts the desired outcome. In professional settings, this paradox manifests in the pursuit of flawless performance. Workers who obsess over making zero mistakes often become so anxious and self-conscious that they perform worse than if they had accepted the possibility of imperfection. The pressure to be perfect creates tension and stress that actually increase the likelihood of errors. Even in relationships, the pursuit of perfect harmony can create discord. Partners who try to eliminate all conflict might find themselves suppressing important feelings and concerns, leading to deeper problems later. The attempt to create a perfectly smooth relationship surface can prevent the authentic communication and growth that come from working through natural conflicts and disagreements. The paradox extends into creative endeavors as well. Artists who strive for perfect execution often find their work becoming stiff and lifeless. The most moving and powerful art often comes from embracing imperfection, allowing for the happy accidents and unexpected elements that give work its unique character and appeal. This isn't to say we shouldn't strive for excellence or try to do things well. Rather, the perfection paradox teaches us about the difference between healthy striving and paralyzing perfectionism. It suggests that true perfection might lie not in flawless execution, but in the authentic expression of something real and meaningful. Consider how this paradox plays out in personal development. People who try to become perfect versions of themselves often end up less satisfied and less authentic than those who accept their flaws and work with them. The pursuit of perfect self-improvement can become a form of self-rejection, denying the value and beauty of our current imperfect selves. This has profound implications for how we approach goals and aspirations. Instead of aiming for perfect outcomes, we might find more success and satisfaction in embracing what the Japanese call wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and impermanence. This perspective suggests that flaws and irregularities aren't problems to be eliminated, but essential elements that give life its depth and character. The perfection paradox also reveals something important about the nature of control. Often, our pursuit of perfection is really an attempt to control outcomes and eliminate uncertainty. Yet some of life's most perfect moments come precisely when we let go of control and allow ourselves to be present with what is, rather than striving for what we think should be. Imagine standing between two perfectly parallel mirrors, stretching infinitely in both directions. As you look ahead, you see an endless series of reflections of yourself, each one slightly farther away than the last. But as you turn to look behind, you see the same infinite regression. This is the observer's paradox, where the act of observing something fundamentally changes what's being observed, and your presence becomes both the viewer and part of the infinite view itself. The implications of this paradox reach far beyond simple optical illusions. Consider what happens when scientists study human behavior. The very act of observing people changes how they act. They become more self-conscious, adjust their behavior, try to meet perceived expectations. The researcher's presence becomes part of the phenomenon they're trying to study objectively. It's like trying to study a natural habitat, while your very presence disturbs the environment you're attempting to observe. This paradox becomes even more fascinating when we consider modern technology. Social media platforms claim to show us authentic human interaction, yet the knowledge that we're being watched fundamentally changes how we behave online. We curate our lives, filter our thoughts, present versions of ourselves shaped by the awareness of observation. The platform that promises to show reality ends up creating a new kind of reality altogether. Think about how this plays out in quantum physics, where the observer's paradox takes on its most profound form. At the quantum level, particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until they're observed. The very act of measurement forces them to collapse into a single, definite state. It's as if reality itself remains uncertain until someone looks at it, raising deep questions about the nature of existence and consciousness. But the paradox goes even deeper. When we try to understand ourselves through self-reflection, meditation, or psychological analysis, we encounter a similar problem. The mind trying to understand itself is like an eye trying to see itself directly. The very act of self-observation changes what we're trying to observe. Our attempts to understand our true nature become part of that nature, creating an endless loop of self-reference. In daily life, this paradox manifests in subtle but important ways. Think about trying to fall asleep. The more you observe and think about the process of falling asleep, the harder it becomes to actually sleep. Or consider trying to act natural when you're aware of being watched. The very attempt to be natural becomes unnatural. The observation changes the observed phenomenon. This has profound implications for fields like psychology and sociology. Researchers studying human behavior must constantly grapple with how their presence and methods affect what they're studying. How do you understand authentic human behavior when the very act of studying it makes it inauthentic? It's like trying to measure the temperature of water with a thermometer that inevitably heats or cools the water as it takes the measurement. The observer's paradox also raises important questions about consciousness and reality. If observation changes what's being observed, and if we're constantly observing our world and ourselves, what is the true nature of reality when it's not being observed? Does unobserved reality even exist in a definite form? Or does it remain in a state of possibility until consciousness interacts with it? Consider how this affects our understanding of history and documentation. The act of recording events changes them. The knowledge that something will be remembered and analyzed affects how people behave in the moment. Even personal memories are shaped by the act of remembering. Each time we recall something, we slightly alter it, creating a new version influenced by the very act of observation. The implications extend into art and creativity as well. Artists who become too self-conscious about their process often find their work becoming stilted and artificial. The observer effect can paralyze natural creativity, leading to what we sometimes call writer's block or analysis paralysis. The awareness of observation becomes a barrier to authentic expression. Picture yourself in a vast library containing every possible book that could ever be written. Every combination of letters, every story that could be told, every truth and every falsehood, all exist somewhere on these infinite shelves. This is the library paradox, where unlimited possibility creates both infinite meaning and complete meaninglessness simultaneously. In this library, somewhere, there's a perfect biography of your life, not just up to now, but including everything you'll ever do. There's also an infinite number of almost perfect biographies, each differing by just one detail. Some describe choices you might have made differently. Others predict futures that may or may not come true. Which one is real? When every possible version exists, how can any single version claim to be the truth? Consider searching for a specific piece of information in this library. You find a book that contains exactly what you're looking for. But how can you trust it? For every book containing the truth, there are countless others containing every possible variation and contradiction of that truth. The very completeness of the library makes it impossible to distinguish fact from fiction. Let's make this more concrete. Imagine finding a book that claims to predict tomorrow's weather. In this infinite library, there must be a book that gets it exactly right. But there are also infinite books making every other possible prediction. The existence of the correct prediction becomes meaningless when buried among endless incorrect ones. It's like having every possible answer to a question. Having all answers becomes the same as having no answer at all. This paradox appears in modern technology. Consider internet search engines. They give us access to vast amounts of information, but the sheer volume can make finding truth more difficult, not less. When every viewpoint and its opposite are available at our fingertips, how do we determine what's real? The abundance of information becomes a form of scarcity, a scarcity of certainty. The library paradox extends into personal identity as well. If every possible version of your life story exists, which version are you really living? Each choice you make aligns you with one version while diverging from countless others. Yet all these versions exist simultaneously in the library's infinite collection. Your current life becomes just one path through an infinite maze of possibilities. Think about how this plays out in creative work. A writer sitting down to create a story might feel overwhelmed, knowing that, in theory, their story already exists somewhere in this infinite library. Every possible combination of words they might choose is already there, waiting to be discovered rather than created. Does this make the act of creation meaningless? Or does it make the act of choosing one specific version more meaningful. The paradox becomes even more fascinating when we consider its implications for knowledge and discovery. In this library, every scientific truth waiting to be discovered is already written down, along with every possible false theory. Every solution to current problems exists, but so does every possible wrong approach. The challenge isn't finding information, it's distinguishing truth from an infinite sea of falsehood. This reflects a very real challenge in our information age. When faced with overwhelming amounts of data, our ability to filter and discern becomes more crucial than raw access to information. The library teaches us that having access to everything isn't the same as knowing anything. True knowledge requires not just access to information, but the wisdom to navigate through it. Consider how this paradox affects decision-making. When every possible choice and its consequences are already mapped out somewhere in the library, does this make our decisions more informed or more paralyzed? The existence of infinite possibilities could either free us to choose without fear or paralyze us with the weight of endless options. The library paradox also raises questions about originality and innovation. If every possible idea already exists in some form, what does it mean to create something new? Perhaps true creativity lies not in generating completely new ideas, but in the unique way we select and combine existing elements into meaningful patterns. Consider the nature of happiness itself, particularly the moment when you become aware that you're happy. Have you noticed how that very awareness can sometimes make the happiness slip away? This is the happiness paradox, where our conscious attention to our own joy can disrupt the very state we're trying to appreciate. Imagine sitting in perfect contentment, perhaps watching a beautiful sunset or sharing a quiet moment with someone you love. Everything feels right with the world. Then the thought crosses your mind, I'm so happy right now. Suddenly something shifts. The very recognition of your happiness creates a subtle distance from it. You become an observer of your own experience rather than fully immersed in it. And somehow the perfect moment begins to fade. This paradox reveals something profound about consciousness and experience. When we're truly happy, we're often not thinking about being happy. We're simply being. It's like being in a state of flow, where self-awareness dissolves and we become one with the moment. But our analytical minds want to capture these moments, to understand them, to hold on to them. In doing so, we inadvertently change their nature. Think about children at play, completely absorbed in their imaginary worlds. They're experiencing pure joy without labeling it as such. The moment an adult asks them, "Are you having fun?" they're pulled out of their immersive state into self-reflection. The question itself changes the experience it's trying to measure. The happiness paradox extends beyond momentary experiences. Consider how it affects our pursuit of happiness itself. The more intensely we chase happiness as a goal, the more it seems to elude us. Those who focus obsessively on trying to be happy often end up less satisfied than those who focus on meaningful activities and let happiness arise naturally as a byproduct. This creates a peculiar situation where the path to happiness might require us to stop trying so hard to be happy. It's like trying to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more elusive sleep becomes. Only when you let go of the effort does sleep naturally arrive. Happiness seems to work in a similar way, arriving most easily when we're not actively pursuing it. The paradox becomes even more complex when we consider how modern society approaches happiness. We're surrounded by advice about how to be happy, techniques for increasing happiness, and metrics for measuring it. But could all this focus on happiness actually be making us less happy? The constant evaluation of our happiness levels creates a kind of meta-unhappiness, dissatisfaction with our level of satisfaction. Consider social media, where people constantly share their happiest moments. This curated display of joy can make us feel pressure to be happy all the time, creating anxiety about any moments of neutral or negative emotion. The pursuit of perpetual happiness becomes a source of unhappiness itself. The happiness paradox also reveals something important about the nature of human consciousness. Our ability to reflect on our own mental states is both a gift and a complexity. It allows us to understand ourselves better, but it can also create a separation between the experiencing self and the observing self. This split consciousness can make it difficult to fully inhabit our positive experiences. Yet this paradox doesn't mean we're doomed to unhappiness. Instead, it invites us to reconsider our relationship with happiness itself. Perhaps true happiness isn't something to be pursued directly, but rather a natural outcome of living meaningfully and authentically. It suggests that happiness might be more like a butterfly, landing softly when we're still, but flying away when we try to grasp it. Consider the way memories shape who we are. Each time you remember something, you're not actually accessing the original event. You're remembering the last time you remembered it. This is the memory paradox, where our past changes each time we recall it, making our most cherished memories both permanent and constantly changing at the same time. Think about your most treasured memory, perhaps your first love, a childhood adventure, or a moment of profound achievement. You might believe you remember it exactly as it happened, preserved like a photograph in your mind. But neuroscience tells us something fascinating. Every time you recall this memory, you're actually rewriting it slightly. The very act of remembering changes the memory itself. This creates an extraordinary situation where the memories we revisit most often, the ones we consider most precious, are actually the ones that have been most altered by the process of remembering. It's like a beloved story that changes slightly with each retelling, yet we remain convinced we're telling it exactly the same way each time. Consider how this plays out in shared memories. Two people who experience the same event often remember it differently, and their versions tend to diverge more over time. Each person's repeated recollection of the event shapes it differently, colored by their perspective, emotions, and subsequent experiences. Yet, both might insist their version is the true one. The paradox deepens when we consider how memories shape our identity. We are, in many ways, the sum of our memories. Our sense of self is built on the story we tell about our past. But if our memories are constantly being revised by the act of remembering, what does this mean for the stability of our identity? We're simultaneously preserving and transforming our past with every recollection. Think about photographs and how they interact with memory. We often use photos to preserve memories, but they can actually alter our recollections. After seeing a photo multiple times, we might start remembering the photo rather than the original event. The tool we use to maintain accuracy becomes a source of modification. This paradox has profound implications for how we understand trauma and healing. Painful memories that we avoid thinking about might actually stay closer to their original form than memories we repeatedly revisit and process. Yet working through difficult memories and inevitably changing them through this process might be essential for healing. The memory paradox also affects how we plan for the future. Our expectations about what will happen are largely based on our memories of what has happened before. But if these memories are constantly being revised, how reliable are they as guides for future behavior? We're using an ever-changing past to navigate toward an uncertain future. Consider how this paradox influences our relationships. Shared experiences form the foundation of our connections with others. But if each person's memories of these experiences are constantly evolving in different ways, what does this mean for the nature of these bonds? Perhaps relationships survive not because we remember things the same way, but because we're willing to accept and integrate each other's changing versions of the past. The paradox becomes even more fascinating when we consider how modern technology affects memory. Our phones and social media accounts create perfect digital records of events, yet these records might actually interfere with the natural process of memory evolution. When our memories conflict with documented evidence, which should we trust? Our evolving internal narrative or the unchanging external record? Consider the nature of change itself, particularly the impossible task of pinpointing exactly when something becomes something else. When exactly does a collection of grains become a pile? When does a person shift from being young to being old? This is the threshold paradox, where continuous change creates discrete categories that we can recognize but never precisely define. Picture yourself slowly adding grains of sand to a flat surface, one at a time. At first, there's clearly no pile, just scattered grains. At some point, you'll definitely have a pile. But when exactly did it transform from not a pile to a pile? Was it the 100th grain? The 1,000th? Any number you choose seems arbitrary, yet we know piles exist, and we recognize them when we see them. The paradox becomes even more fascinating when we consider human development. When exactly does a child become an adult? Legal systems try to draw clear lines at 18 or 21 or other specific ages. But we know human maturation is a continuous process. There's no single moment when childhood ends and adulthood begins. Yet we build entire social systems around these categorical distinctions. Think about how this paradox appears in color perception. When does red become orange in the spectrum? We can clearly identify red and orange, but finding the exact point where one becomes the other is impossible. The continuous nature of color defies our attempts to create discrete categories. Yet these categories are essential for how we understand and communicate about color. The threshold paradox challenges our fundamental need to create categories and boundaries in a world that often changes continuously. Consider temperature. We have words like cold, cool, warm, and hot, but nature doesn't recognize these distinctions. Temperature is a continuous scale, yet we impose these categorical boundaries because they help us make sense of our experience. This paradox extends into more complex domains. When does a friendship become love? When does a hobby become a profession? When does confidence become arrogance? We recognize these transitions after they've occurred, but identifying the precise moment of transformation is impossible. It's like trying to catch the exact moment you fall asleep. The very attempt to observe the transition prevents it from happening naturally. The implications reach into science and philosophy. Consider the development of life itself. When exactly does a collection of molecules become alive? Scientists can describe the processes and mechanisms of life, but pinpointing the threshold between non-living and living matter remains elusive. The boundary exists, yet it defies precise definition. Think about language acquisition in children. When exactly does a baby's babbling become speech? When does someone learning a new language become fluent? These transitions are real and observable, yet they resist exact definition. The change is continuous, but our need to categorize forces us to impose artificial boundaries. The threshold paradox also appears in social and political contexts. When does a group of people become a community? When does civil unrest become revolution? When does economic inequality become social injustice? These questions have real consequences for how we organize society, yet their answers remain fundamentally ambiguous. Consider how this paradox affects our understanding of expertise. When does a novice become an expert? We can recognize expertise when we see it, but the transition happens so gradually that marking the exact threshold is impossible. Yet professional certifications and degrees attempt to draw these lines, creating artificial boundaries in continuous development. The paradox teaches us something profound about the nature of change and our attempts to understand it. Perhaps the very idea of discrete thresholds is a human construct, useful for practical purposes, but not reflecting the continuous nature of reality. Yet we can't function without these categories and distinctions, even while acknowledging their fundamental arbitrariness. Consider the puzzle of self-improvement, specifically the strange contradiction that arises when we try to change who we are. If you succeed in becoming a completely different person, who exactly achieved this transformation? This is the identity paradox, where the very act of trying to change yourself raises questions about who exactly is doing the changing. Imagine someone who wants to transform themselves entirely, to become, as they might say, a completely different person. They work hard at this transformation, changing their habits, beliefs, and behaviors. Eventually, they succeed. But here's where the paradox emerges. If they've truly become a completely different person, then who accomplished this change? The original person who no longer exists, or the new person who didn't exist when the journey began? This paradox becomes even more complex when we consider memory and continuity of consciousness. If you radically change your personality, beliefs, and values, are you still the same person who made those changes? The memories belong to your former self, yet they're experienced by your new self. It's like a bridge between two different people, yet both are supposedly you. Think about how this plays out in personal growth. When you learn from a mistake and change your behavior, who exactly learned the lesson? The person who made the mistake no longer exists in the same form, yet the person who learned from it wouldn't exist without that original mistake having been made. The changing self seems to exist in a strange space between past and present identities. The identity paradox challenges our basic assumptions about personal continuity. We tend to think of ourselves as constant entities moving through time. But if we're constantly changing, even in small ways, then what remains constant? It's like trying to step into the same river twice. Not only has the river changed, but the person stepping into it has changed as well. Consider how this affects our understanding of responsibility and growth. If someone commits a crime, then genuinely reforms and becomes a better person, how should we think about their responsibility for the past action? The person who committed the crime, in a very real sense, no longer exists. Yet we hold the reformed person accountable for actions committed by their former self. This paradox extends into every aspect of personal development. When you make a promise to change yourself, who are you making that promise to? The current self, who won't exist once the change is made, or the future self, who doesn't exist yet? It's like trying to make a contract between two people who can never exist at the same time. The implications reach into therapy and personal transformation. When someone seeks to heal from trauma or overcome destructive patterns, they're essentially trying to become someone new while retaining enough continuity to benefit from the change. It's a delicate balance between transformation and preservation, becoming different while remaining somehow the same. Think about how this paradox appears in education and learning. When you learn something new, you become a slightly different person, one who knows something your former self didn't know. Each piece of knowledge transforms you in subtle ways. So who exactly is doing the learning? The person who started the process, or the continuously evolving self that emerges through education? The identity paradox also raises questions about authenticity and self-improvement. If you're trying to become your true self, who is doing the trying? Is the self doing the searching more or less authentic than the self being sought? It's like trying to find something while simultaneously becoming the thing you're looking for. This paradox challenges our entire notion of personal development and growth. Perhaps the very idea of becoming a different person is fundamentally flawed. Maybe change isn't about becoming someone else, but about revealing different aspects of who we already are, like uncovering parts of ourselves rather than creating new ones. Consider the strange relationship between connection and loneliness in our digital age. The more ways we have to connect with others, the more isolated many people feel. This is the connection paradox, where tools designed to bring us closer together can actually drive us further apart. Imagine having thousands of friends on social media, constant access to messaging apps, and endless opportunities for digital interaction. You're more connected than any human being in history, yet something feels missing. Despite being able to reach anyone at any time, there's a deepening sense of disconnection. The more channels we have for connection, the harder it seems to form meaningful bonds. This paradox reveals itself in everyday situations. People sitting together in a restaurant, each staring at their phones, technically connected to hundreds of others, but disconnected from those physically present. Friends messaging each other constantly throughout the day, yet struggling to maintain deep conversations when they meet in person. The very tools that promise to enhance our relationships might be changing the fundamental nature of human connection. Consider how this plays out in social gatherings. Everyone's taking photos and videos, sharing their experience in real time with people who aren't there. But in doing so, they're less present with those who are. The desire to document and share the moment becomes more important than experiencing it directly. We're simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, connected to everyone and no one. The connection paradox extends beyond social situations into our inner lives. With constant access to others' thoughts, opinions, and experiences, we might be losing touch with our own inner voice. The noise of constant connection drowns out the silence needed for self-reflection and personal growth. We're so busy sharing our lives that we forget to live them. Think about how this affects relationships. We can track each other's locations, see when messages are read, know when someone was last online. Yet these tools that promise to keep us connected often breed anxiety and mistrust. The ability to be constantly in touch creates an expectation of constant availability, turning connection into obligation. The paradox becomes even more complex when we consider online communities. People can find groups that share their most specific interests, connecting with others who understand them in ways their physical community might not. Yet these digital connections, while meaningful, often lack the depth and richness of in-person relationships. We trade breadth of connection for depth. Consider how this affects workplace relationships. Remote work tools allow us to collaborate across continents, yet many workers report feeling increasingly isolated. Video calls and chat messages can transmit information efficiently, but they struggle to convey the subtle human elements that build true rapport and understanding. The connection paradox also influences how we form and maintain friendships. Social media lets us keep in touch with hundreds of acquaintances, but this might come at the cost of developing and nurturing deeper friendships. We know more about more people, but we might truly know fewer people well. This paradox raises important questions about the nature of human connection itself. What does it mean to be truly connected in an age of digital intermediaries? Are we sacrificing depth for breadth, quality for quantity? The tools that promise to eliminate distance might be creating new forms of separation we don't yet fully understand. Consider how this affects younger generations growing up in this connected yet disconnected world. They're expert navigators of digital social spaces, but might struggle with in-person social skills. They have access to more potential connections than ever before, yet rates of loneliness and social anxiety continue to rise. Consider the nature of expertise and knowledge, particularly how increasing mastery of a subject often leads to increasing uncertainty about it. This is the expert's paradox, where the more deeply you understand something, the more you realize how much remains unknown, leading to less confidence even as your actual expertise grows. Imagine a student beginning to study quantum physics. At first, everything seems clear and straightforward. Particles, waves, basic equations. They feel confident in their grasp of the subject. But as they advance, studying more deeply, they encounter layer after layer of complexity. The certainty they felt as a beginner gives way to an expanding awareness of unknowns. Counterintuitively, their growing expertise makes them feel less, not more, certain about their understanding. This paradox manifests across all fields of knowledge. Consider a master chef who spends decades perfecting their craft. Rather than feeling they've mastered cooking completely, they become increasingly aware of subtle variations in ingredients, countless possible techniques, and endless combinations they haven't yet explored. Their expertise reveals not mastery, but an ever-expanding frontier of possibility. Think about how this plays out in professional development. Novices often speak with complete confidence, making bold declarations about their field. Meanwhile, true experts tend to be more measured, more likely to qualify their statements, more aware of exceptions and uncertainties. Their deeper knowledge has taught them to be more cautious in their claims. The expert's paradox challenges our basic assumptions about learning and achievement. We typically think of expertise as a journey from uncertainty to certainty, from confusion to clarity. But real expertise often works in the opposite direction. The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. It's like climbing a mountain only to discover it's part of an endless mountain range. Consider how this affects scientific research. A beginning researcher might think they can solve a problem quickly, but as they study it more deeply, the problem reveals increasingly complex layers. Each answer raises new questions. The expert doesn't just know more than the novice, they're also more aware of how much remains unknown. This paradox extends into creative fields as well. A beginning artist might feel confident copying basic techniques, but a master artist often struggles more with their work, seeing countless possibilities and subtle choices in every decision. Their expertise hasn't made creation easier. It's made them more aware of the complexity of their craft. Think about how this paradox appears in decision-making. Those with surface-level knowledge often make quick, confident decisions. But true experts might take longer to decide, weighing numerous factors and considerations their experience has taught them to recognize. Their expertise makes them more, not less, aware of the complexity of their choices. The expert's paradox also affects how we teach and share knowledge. How do you explain a subject to beginners when your expertise has shown you how complex it really is? The challenge becomes finding ways to simplify without oversimplifying, to provide clarity while acknowledging deeper complexity. Consider how this plays out in leadership roles. New leaders often feel certain about their decisions and directions. But experienced leaders, having seen more outcomes and understood more variables, might approach decisions with greater caution and nuance. Their expertise has taught them the true complexity of leadership. Consider the peculiar relationship between desire and satisfaction. Specifically, how our minds seem to value things differently before and after we obtain them. This is the desire paradox, where the very act of achieving what we want often diminishes its perceived value, making the chase more rewarding than the catch. Imagine wanting something intensely, perhaps a new job, a relationship, or a material possession. In your mind, obtaining this thing will bring complete satisfaction. You pursue it with single-minded focus, investing enormous energy in the chase. Finally, you achieve your goal. But instead of lasting satisfaction, you experience a brief moment of happiness, followed by a strange emptiness. The thing you wanted so desperately somehow means less now that it's yours. This paradox reveals something profound about human psychology. When we desire something, our minds create an idealized version of it, imbuing it with almost magical properties. We convince ourselves that this one thing will transform our lives, bring lasting happiness, or solve our problems. But reality can never match these perfect mental constructions, leading to inevitable disappointment. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. A child desperately wants a specific toy, certain it will bring endless joy. Once they receive it, they play with it briefly before moving on to wanting something else. Adults aren't much different. We constantly chase new goals, achievements, or acquisitions, each time certain that this one will finally bring lasting satisfaction. The desire paradox extends beyond material possessions into every aspect of human achievement. Consider career advancement. Someone might work tirelessly toward a promotion, imagining how different life will be in the new position. Yet once they achieve it, the satisfaction quickly fades as new desires and challenges emerge. The anticipation of success often proves more exciting than success itself. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about motivation and happiness. We tend to think that getting what we want will make us happy, but the paradox suggests that wanting itself might be a more powerful source of satisfaction than having. It's like a cat chasing a laser pointer. The pursuit itself provides the engagement and excitement, not catching the uncatchable dot. Consider how this affects relationships. The early stages of romance, filled with possibility and anticipation, often feel more intense and exciting than the settled reality of a long-term relationship. Yet this doesn't mean the early stage is better, just that our minds value anticipation differently than achievement. The paradox becomes even more complex when we consider how it influences our decision-making. When we want something, we focus on its positive aspects, imagining how it will improve our lives. After we get it, we start noticing flaws and limitations we were blind to before. Our desire literally changes how we perceive reality. Think about how this plays out in consumer behavior. People often spend months anticipating a major purchase, researching options, imagining possibilities. The anticipation itself becomes a source of pleasure. But once they make the purchase, the excitement quickly fades. The item becomes part of their normal reality, no longer special or exciting. The desire paradox also influences how we set and pursue goals. Each achieved goal tends to be quickly replaced by a new desire, creating an endless cycle of wanting and achieving without lasting satisfaction. It's like climbing a mountain, only to discover that reaching the summit just gives you a better view of higher peaks to climb. Consider the strange way societies deal with change, particularly how attempts to preserve something often end up transforming it completely. This is the preservation paradox, where our efforts to keep things exactly as they are become the very force that alters them beyond recognition. Imagine a small town trying to preserve its authentic character. The locals, worried about losing their community's charm, pass strict regulations about building appearances, restrict new developments, and promote their traditional way of life. But something unexpected happens. The town's quaint character attracts tourists and wealthy newcomers. Property values rise. Original residents are priced out. Small businesses are replaced by boutiques catering to visitors. In trying to preserve its authenticity, the town has transformed into something entirely different. This paradox appears throughout human society. Consider how museums preserve artifacts by removing them from their original context and function. A ceremonial mask, once used in living rituals, becomes a static display piece. In preserving the mask, we fundamentally change its nature. It's no longer a vital part of a living tradition, but a specimen of a dead one. Think about language preservation efforts. When we try to freeze a language in its current form, protecting it from change, we actually kill its natural evolution. Living languages change constantly. New words emerge, meanings shift, grammar evolves. A perfectly preserved language is, paradoxically, a dead one. The preservation paradox extends into cultural traditions. When we consciously try to maintain traditional practices unchanged, we often transform them into performances of themselves. Consider traditional festivals that become tourist attractions. In preserving the outer form, we sometimes lose the original spirit and meaning. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about conservation and heritage. We tend to think we can keep things exactly as they are, but the very act of trying to prevent change becomes a form of change itself. It's like trying to preserve a butterfly by pinning it to a board. You maintain its form, but lose its essential nature. Consider how this affects relationships. Partners who try to preserve their relationship exactly as it was in its early stages often end up damaging it. The effort to prevent natural evolution and growth can make the relationship feel artificial and constrained. True preservation might require allowing change rather than preventing it. The paradox becomes even more fascinating when we consider digital preservation. We can now perfectly preserve vast amounts of information, but this variability is changing how we create and consume culture. When everything is preserved, nothing stands out. The flood of preserved content paradoxically makes it harder to maintain meaningful connections with our cultural heritage. Think about how this plays out in urban planning. Historic preservation districts often become more artificial than naturally evolved neighborhoods. In trying to maintain their historic character, they become more like theme parks than living communities. The very rules meant to preserve authenticity create a new kind of inauthenticity. The preservation paradox also influences how we think about nature conservation. Sometimes, efforts to preserve wilderness exactly as it is can backfire. Natural systems need change and disturbance to remain healthy. A forest protected from all fires might actually become more vulnerable to catastrophic burning. Consider the nature of progress itself, particularly how advances in one area often create new problems that negate or even reverse the initial improvement. This is the progress paradox, where solutions to problems frequently generate equally challenging new problems, making it unclear whether we've actually moved forward at all. Imagine the development of antibiotics, one of humanity's greatest medical achievements. These drugs saved countless lives by curing previously fatal infections, but their very success led to overuse, which created antibiotic-resistant bacteria, potentially leaving us more vulnerable than before. The solution became part of a new, more complex problem. Think about how this plays out in technology. We develop social media to connect people, but this connection leads to new forms of loneliness and social anxiety. We create labor-saving devices to give us more free time, but end up working longer hours to pay for and maintain these devices. Each solution seems to spawn new challenges that we didn't anticipate. The progress paradox appears in environmental efforts too. Electric cars reduce direct emissions, but the production of their batteries creates new environmental challenges. Solar panels generate clean energy, but their manufacture and disposal pose new ecological problems. We solve one environmental issue while inadvertently creating others. Consider how this affects urban development. Cities build bigger roads to reduce traffic congestion, But the improved roads attract more drivers, eventually leading to worse congestion than before. The very solution to the problem encourages behaviors that intensify it. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about advancement and improvement. We tend to think of progress as linear, solving problems one by one, steadily moving forward. But the progress paradox suggests a more complex reality, where each step forward might also be a step in another, unexpected direction. Think about educational testing. We implement standardized tests to measure and improve learning, but this often leads to teaching to the test, potentially reducing actual education quality. The tool designed to ensure better education might actually be impeding it. The paradox becomes even more fascinating when we consider medical advances. Treatments that save lives often lead to new health challenges. We cure diseases that once killed young people, only to face an epidemic of age-related conditions. Success in one area creates new challenges in another. Consider how this affects social progress. Efforts to create equality through affirmative action can sometimes reinforce the very divisions they aim to heal. Anti-discrimination laws can lead to more subtle forms of discrimination. The tools we create to solve social problems often transform those problems rather than eliminating them. The progress paradox also appears in economic development. When a poor region develops economically, it often loses the social cohesion and community bonds that helped its people survive poverty. Material progress sometimes comes at the cost of social and cultural regression. This isn't to say that progress isn't real or valuable. Rather, the paradox suggests that progress is more complex than we often assume. It's not a straight line forward, but a complex web of interconnected changes, each affecting the others in ways we might not predict or understand. Consider how we approach decision-making, particularly the strange way that having more options often makes it harder to choose. This is the choice paradox, where increased freedom of choice can lead to decreased satisfaction and even paralysis in decision-making. Imagine standing in a modern supermarket, facing an entire aisle of just breakfast cereals. Dozens of brands, hundreds of variations, healthy options, indulgent options, different flavors, sizes, and prices. What should be a simple decision becomes overwhelming. You spend 15 minutes comparing options, only to leave feeling uncertain about your final choice. The abundance of choice has made the decision harder, not easier. This paradox manifests in more significant life decisions too. Think about career choices. Previous generations often had limited options, following a family trade or choosing from a few local opportunities. Today, the possibilities seem endless, yet this abundance of choice often leads to anxiety, self-doubt, and fear of making the wrong decision. People spend years wondering if they've chosen the right path, haunted by the ghost of unexplored possibilities. The choice paradox becomes even more complex when we consider modern dating. Dating apps provide access to more potential partners than ever before in human history. But rather than making it easier to find a satisfying relationship, many people find themselves constantly wondering if there might be someone better, just another swipe away. The abundance of choice makes it harder to commit and find contentment. Consider how this affects consumer satisfaction. When we have few options, we tend to make peace with our choice and focus on its positive aspects. But with many options, we're more likely to focus on what we might be missing, on the features other choices offered that our selection lacks. More choice often leads to less satisfaction with our final decision. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about freedom and happiness. We tend to think that more choice equals more freedom, equals more happiness. But the choice paradox suggests that beyond a certain point, additional options become a burden rather than a benefit. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose instead of a water fountain. Think about how this affects education. Students today can choose from thousands of possible majors, specializations, and career paths. But this abundance of choice can be paralyzing. Many students feel overwhelmed by the pressure to make the right choice, knowing that each decision closes off countless other possibilities. The paradox becomes particularly relevant in the digital age. Streaming services offer thousands of movies and shows, yet many people spend more time browsing options than actually watching content. The abundance of choice creates a kind of decision fatigue, where the effort of choosing becomes more draining than enjoyable. Consider how this affects life satisfaction more broadly. When people believe they can be anything and do anything, they often feel like failures for not achieving everything. The freedom to choose any path can create pressure to choose the perfect path, leading to chronic dissatisfaction with whatever path we're currently on. The choice paradox also influences how we think about personal identity. In a world of endless possibilities, every choice of who to be comes with the weight of all the other selves we could have become. This can lead to a kind of existential anxiety, where the freedom to be anyone becomes a burden rather than a liberation. Consider the relationship between simplicity and complexity, particularly how our attempts to simplify complex things often end up making them more complicated. This is the simplicity paradox, where the pursuit of simplicity itself becomes a source of new complexity. Imagine trying to explain a complex concept to someone. You start breaking it down into simpler parts, creating analogies, adding clarifying details. But something strange happens. Your explanation keeps growing longer, adding more layers, more exceptions, more clarifications. In trying to make things simpler, you've actually made them more complex. Your attempt to clarify has created new confusion. Think about how this plays out in organizational systems. A company tries to simplify its procedures by creating a streamlined process, but to account for every possibility and exception, they end up creating an elaborate system of rules, sub-rules, and guidelines. The attempt to simplify has generated a new form of complexity. The simplicity paradox appears in technology too. We create new tools to make our lives simpler, but each tool comes with its own learning curve, maintenance requirements, and compatibility issues. Our phones are supposed to simplify communication, but managing all their features, settings, and updates becomes a complex task in itself. Consider how this affects writing and communication. The advice, "keep it simple," often leads writers to add more explanations, examples, and context. In trying to make their message clearer, they end up writing longer, more detailed texts. The pursuit of simplicity paradoxically produces complexity. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about clarity and understanding. We tend to think that making something simpler always makes it more accessible. But the simplicity paradox suggests that sometimes embracing complexity might be more effective than trying to force simplicity where it doesn't naturally fit. Think about educational materials, textbooks. Trying to make complex subjects easy to understand often become longer and more detailed than the original material they're trying to simplify. Each simplified explanation requires additional context, creating new layers of information to process. The paradox becomes even more fascinating when we consider design. The minimalist movement aims for simplicity in appearance, but achieving this simplicity often requires complex engineering and careful planning. What looks simple on the surface might be incredibly complex underneath. Consider how this affects legal documents. Attempts to make contracts user-friendly often result in longer documents, as every possible interpretation must be clarified and defined. The desire for clarity leads to more words, not fewer. The simplicity paradox also influences how we approach problem solving. Simple solutions to complex problems often create unintended consequences that require additional solutions. Each layer of simplification can spawn new complexities that need to be addressed. This isn't to say that simplification is always counterproductive. Rather, the paradox suggests that true simplicity might come from accepting and working with complexity, rather than trying to eliminate it entirely. Sometimes, the most elegant solution is one that acknowledges and incorporates complexity, rather than trying to hide it. Consider the nature of reality itself, particularly how our attempts to find absolute truth often reveal its inherently relative nature. This is the reality paradox, where our search for what's really real shows us that reality might be more fluid and observer-dependent than we imagined. Picture yourself trying to determine the true color of an object. You see it as blue in daylight, but it appears purple under artificial light and almost black in dim conditions. Which is its real color? The more carefully you try to pin down its true nature, the more you realize that color itself is not an absolute property, but a relationship between object, light, and observer. This paradox extends deep into our understanding of the physical world. Scientists trying to determine the exact position of a particle discover that the very act of measurement affects what they're measuring. The harder they try to pin down absolute reality, the more it seems to slip away, revealing itself as a dance of probabilities and relationships, rather than fixed, absolute facts. Think about how this plays out in personal experience. You try to remember exactly what happened during an important event in your life, but each time you recall it, the memory shifts slightly. Other people who were there remember it differently. Which version is really real? The more you try to establish the absolute truth, the more you realize that even our memories and experiences exist in a fluid state of constant reinterpretation. The reality paradox becomes even more complex when we consider perception. We assume we're seeing reality directly, but our brains actually construct our experience from limited sensory data. Colors, sounds, and sensations that seem absolutely real to us are interpretations created by our minds. The very act of trying to experience pure reality reveals how much our perception shapes what we consider real. Consider how this affects our understanding of history. Historians trying to determine what really happened in the past find that every account is colored by perspective, context, and interpretation. The more rigorously they search for absolute historical truth, the more they discover the inherently interpretive nature of all historical knowledge. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about truth and reality. We tend to think of reality as something solid and absolute, existing independently of observers. But the reality paradox suggests that what we call reality might be more like a conversation between observer and observed, each influencing and defining the other. Think about how this manifests in social reality. The more we try to determine the real meaning of social concepts like justice, freedom, or love, the more we discover how these concepts shift and change depending on cultural context and individual perspective. The search for absolute definitions reveals their inherently relative nature. The paradox becomes particularly fascinating when we consider consciousness. The harder we try to locate and define the real self, the more it seems to dissolve into a complex web of thoughts, memories, and experiences that are constantly changing. The very attempt to find the absolute self reveals its fluid, constructed nature. Consider how this affects our understanding of time. The more precisely we try to measure the present moment, the more it slips away. Is now a second, a millisecond? The present moment seems real, yet trying to pin it down reveals it as an ever-moving boundary between past and future. Consider the nature of reality itself, particularly how our attempts to find absolute truth often reveal its inherently relative nature. This is the reality paradox, where our search for what's really real shows us that reality might be more fluid and observer-dependent than we imagined. Picture yourself trying to determine the true color of an object. You see it as blue in daylight, but it appears purple under artificial light and almost black in dim conditions. A person with color blindness might see it differently altogether, while some animals would perceive colors we can't even imagine. Which is its real color? The more carefully you try to pin down its true nature, the more you realize that color itself is not an absolute property, but a relationship between object, light, and observer. This paradox extends deep into our understanding of the physical world. Scientists trying to determine the exact position of a particle discover that the very act of measurement affects what they're measuring. The harder they try to pin down absolute reality, the more it seems to slip away, revealing itself as a dance of probabilities and relationships rather than fixed absolute facts. Even the most fundamental properties of matter and energy exist in states of uncertainty until they're observed. Think about how this plays out in personal experience. You try to remember exactly what happened during an important event in your life. But each time you recall it, the memory shifts slightly. Other people who were there remember it differently. Some recall details you've forgotten, while they've forgotten things you remember clearly. Videos or photographs of the event might show aspects that contradict everyone's memories. Which version is really real? The more you try to establish the absolute truth, the more you realize that even our memories and experiences exist in a fluid state of constant reinterpretation. The reality paradox becomes even more complex when we consider perception. We assume we're seeing reality directly, but our brains actually construct our experience from limited sensory data. Colors, sounds, and sensations that seem absolutely real to us are interpretations created by our minds. We don't see most of the electromagnetic spectrum, can't hear most frequencies, and filter out countless sensory inputs every second. The very act of trying to experience pure reality reveals how much our perception shapes what we consider real. Consider how this affects our understanding of history. Historians trying to determine what really happened in the past find that every account is colored by perspective, context, and interpretation. Even seemingly objective evidence, like documents and artifacts, must be interpreted through layers of cultural and personal bias. The more rigorously they search for absolute historical truth, the more they discover the inherently interpretive nature of all historical knowledge. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about truth and reality. We tend to think of reality as something solid and absolute, existing independently of observers. But the reality paradox suggests that what we call reality might be more like a conversation between observer and observed, each influencing and defining the other. Even our scientific instruments, designed to give us objective measurements, become part of this conversation, affecting what they measure in subtle but important ways. The implications reach into every aspect of human knowledge and experience. In mathematics, the most precise and abstract of sciences, Kurt Gödel showed that any sufficiently complex system must contain truths that cannot be proven within that system. The very attempt to create a complete and consistent description of reality reveals inherent limitations in our ability to do so. Think about how this manifests in social reality. The more we try to determine the real meaning of social concepts like justice, freedom, or love, the more we discover how these concepts shift and change depending on cultural context and individual perspective. What seems obviously true in one society might be obviously false in another. The search for absolute definitions reveals their inherently relative nature. The paradox becomes particularly fascinating when we consider consciousness. The harder we try to locate and define the real self, the more it seems to dissolve into a complex web of thoughts, memories, and experiences that are constantly changing. We can't find a fixed, unchanging core that we can point to and say, "This is the real me." The very attempt to find the absolute self reveals its fluid, constructed nature. Consider the relationship between effort and effortlessness, particularly how trying too hard to achieve something often prevents us from achieving it. This is the effort paradox, where our very striving becomes the obstacle to our success, and letting go becomes the path to achievement. Imagine trying to fall asleep on an important night, perhaps before a crucial meeting or early morning flight. The more you try to force yourself to sleep, the more alert you become. Your effort to sleep actually creates wakefulness. Only when you stop trying, when you let go of the effort to sleep, does sleep naturally arrive. This simple experience reveals a profound truth about the nature of effort and achievement. The effort paradox manifests in countless areas of human experience. Consider the artist trying to be creative. The harder they try to force creativity, the more stilted and artificial their work becomes. True creativity often emerges in moments of relaxation, when the conscious mind loosens its grip and allows ideas to flow naturally. The very effort to be creative can block the creative process. This paradox becomes even more fascinating when we examine athletic performance. Athletes often speak of being in the zone, a state of perfect performance where everything flows naturally. But you can't force yourself into this state. The more you consciously try to achieve it, the more it eludes you. Peak performance comes when you stop trying so hard and allow your trained abilities to express themselves naturally. Think about how this plays out in social situations. The more someone tries to be liked, the more likely they are to come across as desperate or inauthentic. True charisma often emerges when people stop trying to impress others and simply become comfortable being themselves. The effort to be appealing can actually make someone less appealing. The paradox extends into spiritual and meditative practices. The harder you try to quiet your mind in meditation, the more thoughts seem to arise. The very effort to achieve stillness creates mental activity. True meditation often begins when you stop trying to meditate and simply allow your experience to be as it is. Consider how this affects learning and skill acquisition. When learning a new language, there's often a point where trying too hard to speak perfectly actually impedes progress. Natural fluency emerges when we relax our grip on perfection and allow ourselves to make mistakes. The effort to avoid errors can prevent the very fluency we're trying to achieve. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about achievement and success. We're taught that harder work leads to better results, but the effort paradox suggests a more nuanced reality. Sometimes, the path to success involves knowing when to ease up, when to let go, when to allow things to unfold naturally, rather than forcing them. The implications reach into personal relationships as well. The harder someone tries to find love, often the more it eludes them. People who desperately want to be in a relationship might unknowingly create tension and pressure that pushes potential partners away. Meaningful connections often form when we stop trying so hard and simply allow ourselves to be authentic. The effort paradox also appears in leadership and management. Leaders who try too hard to assert their authority often undermine it. True authority often emerges naturally from competence and authentic engagement, rather than from conscious efforts to appear powerful or in control. Think about how this affects personal development and growth. The more intensely we try to change ourselves, the more we might reinforce the patterns we're trying to change. Real transformation often occurs when we stop fighting ourselves and accept who we are, paradoxically, creating space for natural change to occur. Even in intellectual pursuits, this paradox holds true. The harder we try to remember something, the more it seems to escape us. The answer often comes later, when we've stopped actively trying to recall it. Our effort to remember can actually block the natural process of memory retrieval. This isn't to say that effort is unnecessary or counterproductive. Rather, the paradox suggests that there's a subtle art to knowing when to strive and when to let go, when to act and when to allow. It's about finding the balance between effort and effortlessness, between doing and being. Consider the paradoxical relationship between control and chaos, particularly how our attempts to maintain perfect order often create the very disorder we're trying to prevent. This is the control paradox, where increasing efforts to regulate and systematize actually generate more unpredictability and complexity. Imagine a city planner trying to create the perfect traffic system. They install more traffic lights, add new rules, implement sophisticated monitoring systems, all in an effort to create perfect order. But instead of smooth flow, they often create new bottlenecks, unexpected patterns, and novel forms of congestion. The very systems designed to create order become sources of new kinds of chaos. Think about how this plays out in financial markets. The more regulators try to control and stabilize markets with rules and safeguards, the more sophisticated players become at finding new ways around these regulations. Each new rule creates opportunities for novel forms of financial engineering. leading to increasingly complex and potentially unstable systems. The effort to prevent chaos paradoxically generates new forms of it. This paradox manifests profoundly in parenting. Parents who try to control every aspect of their children's lives, protecting them from all possible risks and uncertainties, often find that their children become either rebellious or unable to handle real-world chaos when they encounter it. The attempt to create perfect safety and order can produce either defiance or fragility. Consider how this plays out in organizational management. Companies that implement rigid control systems, trying to eliminate all inefficiencies and uncertainties, often find themselves less able to adapt to changing circumstances. Their very rigidity becomes a source of vulnerability. Meanwhile, organizations that allow for some degree of chaos often prove more resilient and innovative. The control paradox extends into ecological systems. When humans try to control nature perfectly, eliminating all pests, managing all variables, controlling all outcomes, they often create new and unexpected problems. The elimination of one species affects others in unforeseen ways. The attempt to create perfect agricultural order can lead to new forms of ecosystem instability. Think about how this affects personal psychology. People who try to maintain perfect control over their emotions often experience more emotional turbulence. The very attempt to eliminate anxiety can become a source of anxiety. Those who accept and work with their emotional chaos often find more genuine stability than those who try to control everything. This paradox becomes particularly fascinating in the context of artificial intelligence and complex systems. The more we try to program perfect control and predictability into AI systems, the more likely we are to create unexpected, emergent behaviors. Perfect control might be not just impossible, but counterproductive, leading to new forms of unpredictability. Consider how this plays out in social systems. Governments that try to maintain absolute control over their populations often generate new forms of disorder, black markets, underground movements, novel forms of resistance. The very tools of control, surveillance, regulation, enforcement, can create the conditions for new kinds of chaos. The control paradox also appears in creative processes. Artists who try to maintain perfect control over their medium often produce rigid, lifeless work. True creativity often emerges from a dialogue between control and chaos, where the artist guides but doesn't completely dominate the creative process. This isn't to say that all control is negative. Rather, the paradox suggests that there's a subtle balance between order and chaos, control and flexibility. Perhaps the true art lies not in eliminating chaos, but in learning to work with it productively, understanding that some degree of unpredictability is not just inevitable, but potentially valuable. The implications reach into every aspect of life where we try to maintain control. From personal schedules to global systems, the effort to create perfect order often backfires. Yet this doesn't mean we should abandon all attempts at organization. Instead, it suggests we need a more sophisticated understanding of how order and chaos interact. Consider the strange relationship between wisdom and uncertainty, particularly how increasing knowledge often leads to increasing doubt. This is the wisdom paradox, where greater understanding reveals not more certainty, but a deeper appreciation of how much remains unknown. Picture a young student confidently declaring they understand everything about their chosen subject. As they study more deeply, something unexpected happens. Their certainty begins to fade. Each new piece of knowledge reveals new questions, new complexities, new areas of uncertainty. What looked simple and clear becomes rich with nuance and possibility. Think about how this plays out in professional development. A novice doctor might feel completely confident in their diagnoses, while an experienced physician understands how complex and uncertain medicine can be. The more they learn, the more they recognize the limits of their knowledge. Their wisdom manifests not in absolute certainty, but in humble awareness of complexity. The wisdom paradox appears throughout human experience. Consider how our understanding of relationships evolves. Young people often think they know everything about love, while those with more experience recognize how mysterious and unpredictable human connections can be. Greater wisdom brings not more answers, but better questions. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about learning and growth. We tend to think that more knowledge leads to more certainty, but the wisdom paradox suggests that true understanding often leads to greater appreciation of uncertainty. It's like climbing a mountain only to discover that the higher you go, the more peaks you can see in the distance. Consider how this affects scientific research. Beginning scientists might think they can solve the world's problems quickly. As they gain expertise, they realize how complex these challenges really are. Their growing wisdom reveals not just what they know, but the vast extent of what remains unknown. The paradox becomes particularly fascinating when applied to self-knowledge. The more deeply we understand ourselves, the more we realize how mysterious and multifaceted we are. Each insight into our own nature reveals new depths to explore, new aspects of ourselves we hadn't considered. Think about how this manifests in leadership. Inexperienced leaders often feel certain about their decisions, while seasoned leaders understand the complexity of every choice. Their wisdom shows itself not in unwavering confidence, but in thoughtful consideration of multiple perspectives and possibilities. The wisdom paradox also appears in spiritual and philosophical pursuits. Those who claim absolute certainty about life's big questions often have thought about them the least. Deep contemplation tends to lead not to absolute answers, but to a profound appreciation of life's mysteries. Consider how this affects our approach to problem solving. As we gain wisdom, we often become less quick to jump to solutions, more willing to sit with questions and explore complexities. True wisdom might lie not in having all the answers, but in knowing which questions are worth asking. Consider how we experience time, particularly the way it seems to flow differently depending on how we pay attention to it. This is the time perception paradox, where our conscious awareness of time's passage actually changes how we experience its flow. Imagine sitting in a waiting room, constantly checking the clock. Each minute seems to drag endlessly, time moving with excruciating slowness. Yet later, looking back on that same period, it seems to have vanished in an instant. Conversely, when you're deeply engaged in something you enjoy, time flies by unnoticed, but in retrospect, the experience feels rich and full, seeming to have lasted longer than it actually did. This paradox reveals something profound about consciousness and temporal experience. When we focus directly on time's passage, it seems to slow down. Yet these slow moments paradoxically leave little impression in our memory. When we forget about time entirely, it moves quickly, yet these periods often expand in our recollection. Think about how this plays out in different life stages. Children, who rarely think about time's passage, experience endless summers that seem to last forever. Adults, constantly aware of time, find years slipping by with increasing speed. Yet when adults recall their childhoods, those endless summers might occupy just a brief moment in memory, while a busy year of adult life feels substantial in retrospect. The time perception paradox appears in moments of crisis too. During accidents or emergencies, time might seem to slow dramatically, allowing for incredibly detailed perception of events. Yet these same moments might pass in what feels like an instant when remembered later. Our experience of time's flow seems to operate independently of clock time. Consider how this affects our enjoyment of life. The more we try to hold on to pleasant moments, consciously savoring them as they occur, the more elusive they become. Yet when we simply allow ourselves to be fully present without trying to grasp or measure time's passage, we often have richer experiences that leave longer-lasting impressions. The paradox extends into how we plan and set goals. We consistently underestimate how long tasks will take when thinking about them in advance. Yet while performing them, time often seems to drag. Our perspective and experienced relationship with time seems to operate by different rules. Think about how this manifests in meditation and mindfulness practices. Beginning meditators often find time moving painfully slowly, each minute an eternity. Yet, experienced practitioners often report losing all sense of time's passage, emerging from deep meditation, uncertain whether minutes or hours have passed. The time perception paradox also influences how we remember our lives. Routine periods where we're barely aware of time's passage seem to vanish from memory, while novel experiences that commanded our full attention remain vivid. Yet, in the moment, routine times often pass more quickly than novel ones. Consider how this affects our understanding of aging and mortality. The more conscious we become of time's limited nature, the faster it seems to pass. Yet this very awareness might lead us to experience life more fully and create more lasting memories. Consider the relationship between meaning and happiness, particularly how the pursuit of meaning can lead to decreased happiness, while the pursuit of happiness can lead to a less meaningful life. This is the meaning paradox, where our attempts to create significance often require sacrificing contentment. Imagine someone dedicating their life to a noble cause, perhaps fighting injustice or working to cure disease. Their work has profound meaning, yet the constant exposure to suffering and struggle often leads to personal unhappiness. Conversely, someone focused solely on personal pleasure might achieve happiness, but feel their life lacks deeper significance. Think about how this plays out in career choices. A person might choose a prestigious, high-paying job that provides material comfort, but leaves them feeling empty and unfulfilled. Another might choose meaningful but challenging work that brings frequent stress and hardship. The pursuit of meaning often requires sacrificing ease and comfort. The meaning paradox manifests in relationships too. Deep, meaningful relationships require vulnerability, conflict, and growth, experiences that can be uncomfortable or painful. Superficial relationships might be more consistently pleasant, but lack the depth that gives life its richness. Consider how this affects creative work. Artists often suffer for their art, experiencing doubt, frustration, and rejection in pursuit of creating something meaningful. Those who avoid such struggles might live more comfortably, but miss the profound satisfaction of bringing something significant into the world. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about what makes a good life. We often think we can maximize both meaning and happiness, but the meaning paradox suggests these goals might sometimes conflict. The most meaningful experiences often come with struggle and discomfort. Think about parenting. Raising children brings profound meaning to many people's lives, yet it often reduces day-to-day happiness, introducing stress, worry, and sacrifice. The deep significance of nurturing new life often comes at the cost of personal comfort and ease. The paradox becomes particularly fascinating when we consider end-of-life perspectives. People often report that their most meaningful experiences were also their most challenging, while periods of pure happiness left little lasting impact on their sense of life's significance. Consider how this affects social engagement. Working for social change often brings meaning, but can be frustrating and difficult. Avoiding such engagement might lead to a more peaceful life, but one that feels less consequential. The meaning paradox also appears in personal growth. The experiences that shape us most profoundly, that give our lives deeper meaning, are often our greatest challenges and struggles. Comfort rarely leads to significant personal development. Consider the relationship between preparation and spontaneity, particularly how our attempts to plan for every possibility often leave us less able to handle the unexpected. This is the preparation paradox, where excessive planning can actually make us less prepared for life's inevitable surprises. Imagine someone who tries to plan every detail of their life, their career path, relationships, financial future. They create elaborate contingency plans for every possible scenario. Yet when genuine uncertainty arrives, something unexpected happens. They often find themselves more paralyzed than those who planned less rigidly. Their very preparedness becomes a form of vulnerability. Think about how this plays out in emergency situations. People with extensive disaster preparations sometimes freeze when real disasters don't match their expectations, while those with less rigid plans might adapt more readily to the actual situation. The very specificity of their preparation becomes a liability when reality takes an unexpected turn. The preparation paradox appears in education too. Students who memorize exact answers for anticipated test questions often struggle more with unexpected questions than those who develop broader understanding. Their precise preparation actually leaves them less prepared for novel challenges. Consider how this affects professional life. Organizations that create detailed plans for every contingency often respond more slowly to unprecedented situations than those maintaining flexible, adaptive approaches. The very comprehensiveness of their preparation can blind them to emerging realities that don't fit their plans. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about readiness and resilience. We tend to think more preparation always equals better preparation, but the preparation paradox suggests that over-preparation can actually reduce our ability to handle genuine uncertainty. Think about how this manifests in social situations. People who carefully rehearse conversations often struggle more with natural interaction than those who remain open to organic flow. Their very preparation can prevent authentic connection and response. The paradox becomes particularly fascinating in creative fields. Artists who plan every detail of their work often produce less compelling results than those who leave room for spontaneity and discovery. The very precision of their preparation can stifle creative emergence. Consider how this affects personal development. People who plan rigid paths to self-improvement often achieve less genuine growth than those who remain open to unexpected opportunities for change. Their very determination to control their development can prevent organic transformation. The preparation paradox also influences how we handle life transitions. Those who try to prepare for every aspect of major changes, like parenthood or career shifts, often struggle more than those who accept that some things can't be fully anticipated. Consider the relationship between success and failure, particularly how our fear of failure often leads to a different kind of failure. This is the success paradox, where the intense desire to succeed and avoid failure actually increases the likelihood of failing in more fundamental ways. Imagine a student so afraid of failing an exam that they spend every waking moment studying, sacrificing sleep, exercise, and social connections. Their singular focus on avoiding failure leads to burnout, health issues, and damaged relationships. Though they might pass the exam, they've failed at maintaining the basic elements of a balanced life. Think about how this plays out in professional settings. Someone so determined to succeed at their job that they never take risks, never challenge the status quo, and never venture beyond their comfort zone. Their very determination to avoid failure prevents them from achieving the kind of success that comes from innovation and bold action. The success paradox manifests in creative endeavors too. Artists, so afraid of creating imperfect work that they never complete anything, constantly revising and refining until opportunities pass them by. Their fear of failure leads to the ultimate creative failure, never sharing their work with the world. Consider how this affects relationships. People so afraid of failed relationships that they never allow themselves to be vulnerable or take emotional risks. Their desire to avoid relationship failure leads to the deeper failure of never forming meaningful connections at all. This paradox challenges our basic assumptions about achievement and risk. We often think that maximizing our chances of success means minimizing all possibilities of failure. But the success paradox suggests that this approach itself can be the biggest failure of all. Think about how this appears in personal growth. People so focused on avoiding mistakes that they never try new things or push their boundaries. Their success at avoiding failure becomes a form of failure. The failure to grow, learn, and develop. The paradox becomes particularly fascinating in leadership roles. Leaders so concerned with maintaining their image of success that they surround themselves with yes people and avoid difficult decisions. Their success at avoiding visible failures leads to the larger failure of ineffective leadership. Consider how this affects innovation and progress. Companies so focused on maintaining their success that they become resistant to change, eventually falling behind more adaptable competitors. Their very success at maintaining the status quo leads to eventual failure. The success paradox also appears in parenting. Parents so determined to ensure their children's success that they shield them from all possibility of failure. These children often grow up lacking resilience and the ability to handle setbacks, a different kind of failure. Consider the relationship between individuality and conformity, particularly how attempts to be unique often lead to new forms of sameness. This is the individuality paradox, where our efforts to stand out from the crowd often result in creating new crowds of people trying to stand out in exactly the same way. Imagine a group of people who pride themselves on being nonconformists. They reject mainstream fashion, music, and lifestyle choices. Yet within their nonconformist community, distinct patterns emerge. Specific styles, behaviors, and attitudes become markers of belonging. Their very rejection of conformity creates a new form of conformity. Think about how this plays out in consumer culture. People trying to express their unique identity through purchases often end up buying the same unique products as everyone else seeking individuality. The mass marketing of individuality creates new forms of uniformity. Even products marketed as one of a kind or exclusive often become widespread symbols of attempted uniqueness. The individuality paradox manifests deeply in social media. Users trying to present authentic, unique personas often fall into recognizable patterns of self-presentation. The same filters, poses, captions, and life events become standardized ways of displaying individuality. The pursuit of digital uniqueness creates new forms of digital conformity. Consider how this affects artistic expression. Artists striving to break free from conventional forms often create new conventions. The avant-garde becomes mainstream, and rebellion against artistic traditions becomes a tradition itself. Even the most radical attempts to reject artistic norms can become normalized and imitated. This paradox extends into personal development and self-help culture. People following advice to be yourself often end up following prescribed paths to authenticity. The very pursuit of individual authenticity becomes standardized through books, courses, and workshops, teaching everyone the same techniques for being unique. Think about how this appears in professional contexts. Job candidates trying to stand out often use the same unique approaches, similar creative resumes, identical, outside-the-box interview responses, standard ways of demonstrating their exceptional qualities. The effort to be a distinctive applicant creates new forms of professional conformity. The paradox becomes particularly fascinating in youth culture. Each generation's rebellion against previous generations often takes predictable forms. Teenagers trying to express their individuality frequently do so through shared symbols of nonconformity, similar clothing styles, music preferences, or social attitudes that mark them as part of their particular cohort of rebels. Consider how this affects language and communication. People trying to express unique thoughts often reach for the same novel phrases or metaphors. Slang terms meant to be distinctive quickly become widespread. Even the ways people express their originality become standardized through common vocabulary and reference points. The individuality paradox also appears in lifestyle choices. Communities formed around alternative lifestyles often develop their own rigid norms and expectations. Whether it's alternative diets, living arrangements, or philosophical outlooks, the rejection of mainstream conformity frequently leads to new forms of group conformity. This isn't to say that true individuality is impossible, but rather that the conscious pursuit of uniqueness often leads to unintended forms of sameness. Perhaps genuine individuality emerges not from trying to be different, but from authentically following one's interests and values, regardless of whether they align with or differ from others. Consider the relationship between understanding and mystery. particularly how greater knowledge often reveals deeper enigmas. This is the mystery paradox, where our increasing comprehension of the world actually enhances our awareness of its fundamental mysteriousness rather than diminishing it. Imagine a scientist studying the cosmos. With each new discovery about the universe's workings, new and more profound questions emerge. Each answer reveals three new mysteries. The development of quantum mechanics didn't simplify our understanding of reality. It introduced deeper puzzles about the nature of existence itself. The more we learn about the universe, the more mysterious it becomes. Think about how this plays out in human consciousness. As neuroscientists map the brain's functions with increasing precision, the mystery of consciousness becomes more rather than less profound. Understanding the neural correlates of consciousness doesn't explain the subjective experience of awareness. Each breakthrough in brain science seems to highlight the deeper mystery of how matter gives rise to mind. The mystery paradox manifests in our exploration of life itself. As biologists unravel the mechanisms of DNA, cellular function, and evolution, the fundamental mystery of life, how it emerged from non-living matter, how it maintains itself, how it develops consciousness, becomes more rather than less remarkable. The more we understand about life's complexity, the more miraculous its existence appears. Consider how this affects our personal relationships. The better we know someone, the more we realize how much about them remains unknowable. Long-term partners often report that their deep familiarity with each other reveals ever new aspects of personality and character. True intimacy involves recognizing the endless mystery within those we know best. This paradox extends into self-knowledge as well. The more deeply we understand ourselves through introspection, therapy, or life experience, the more we recognize the vast unknown territories within our own psyche. Greater self-awareness often reveals how much of ourselves remains mysterious to us. Think about how this appears in artistic creation. As artists master their craft, developing deep technical understanding of their medium, they often find themselves more rather than less in awe of art's mysterious power to move and transform. Technical knowledge enhances rather than reduces the sense of wonder at creative inspiration. The paradox becomes particularly fascinating in spiritual and philosophical pursuits. Those who dedicate their lives to understanding life's big questions often end up with a deeper appreciation for life's ultimate mysteriousness. The most profound wisdom often involves recognizing the limits of human understanding. Consider how this affects our relationship with nature. Environmental scientists, studying ecosystems in minute detail, frequently develop an enhanced sense of nature's fundamental mystery and complexity. The more we learn about ecological relationships, the more we realize how much remains unknown and potentially unknowable. The mystery paradox also appears in our understanding of history. As historians uncover more details about past events, new questions and uncertainties emerge. Each historical discovery seems to reveal new gaps in our knowledge, new possibilities for interpretation, new mysteries to explore. This isn't to say that knowledge isn't valuable or that understanding doesn't progress. Rather, the paradox suggests that true knowledge includes recognizing the vast depths of what we don't and perhaps cannot know. Perhaps wisdom lies not in eliminating mystery, but in developing a deeper appreciation for it. consider the paradox that brings us full circle, the relationship between endings and beginnings, particularly how conclusions often open new doorways of understanding. This is the completion paradox, where reaching the end of something often reveals it as just the beginning of a deeper journey. Imagine finishing a long journey of learning and discovery, only to realize that what seemed like an end point is actually a gateway to new understanding. Like reaching the summit of a mountain only to discover an entire range of peaks beyond, each conclusion becomes a new beginning. This final paradox teaches us that there are no true endings, only transformations and new perspectives. Think about how this manifests in personal growth. When we think we've reached a final understanding about ourselves or life, this very sensation of completion often precipitates a new phase of discovery. The moment we feel we've figured everything out is precisely when new questions begin to emerge. Our certainty becomes the doorway to new uncertainty. The completion paradox appears throughout human experience. Scientists who think they've developed a complete theory find new mysteries emerging from their conclusions. Artists who believe they've mastered their craft discover new challenges and possibilities in that very mastery. Each ending reveals itself as a beginning in disguise. Consider how this affects our understanding of all the paradoxes we've explored. Each apparent contradiction, when deeply understood, doesn't resolve into simple answers, but opens into new and more profound questions. The very attempt to conclude our exploration of paradox reveals how endless and cyclical such exploration truly is. This final paradox teaches us something essential about the nature of understanding itself. True knowledge isn't a destination, but a journey, not a point of arrival, but a constant process of discovery. The more completely we understand this, the more we recognize how much remains to be understood. Think about how this relates to our nightly journey into sleep and dreams. As consciousness fades, it doesn't simply end, but transforms into new forms of awareness. Sleep isn't the opposite of wakefulness, but another stage in the cycle of consciousness. Even as we conclude our waking thoughts, we begin our dream explorations. The paradox becomes particularly meaningful when we consider its implications for all human endeavor. Every scientific discovery, artistic creation, or personal insight doesn't conclude our search for understanding, but opens new pathways for exploration. The more complete our knowledge becomes, the more we recognize its endless nature. Consider how this affects our perception of life itself. Each stage of life we complete doesn't end our journey, but transforms it. Childhood doesn't simply end, it evolves into adolescence. Adulthood isn't a final state, but a continuous process of becoming. Even death might not be an ending, but a transformation we don't yet understand. This completion paradox offers a fitting conclusion to our exploration of life's contradictions, not because it resolves them, but because it helps us understand why they can never be fully resolved. Perhaps the greatest wisdom lies not in solving paradoxes, but in learning to live with them, understanding that their very irresolvability is what makes them valuable. Up next, based on our attempts to influence it, what we've discovered is fascinating, she explains. The more actively people try to manage their experience of time, whether slowing it down or speeding it up, the more it seems to behave in opposition to their intentions. It's as if time has a mind of its own. Consider the experience of Marcus Chen, a mindfulness instructor who became obsessed with living in the moment. I was constantly trying to expand each second, to fully inhabit each instant, he recalls. But the more I tried to stretch time out, the more it seemed to contract. The moments I tried hardest to hold on to became the most elusive, while unexpected moments naturally expanded into timeless experiences. Dr. Sarah Thompson, a neuroscientist studying temporal perception, has documented how our attempts to control time affect our brain's timekeeping mechanisms. When we consciously try to manipulate our experience of time, she notes, we activate neural networks that actually interfere with our natural temporal processing. It's like trying to control your heartbeat. The very act of monitoring it changes its rhythm. The psychological implications of this paradox are particularly profound. Dr. Michael Foster, a clinical psychologist, has observed how people's relationship with time affects their mental well-being. Many of my patients struggle with time anxiety, he explains. They're either trying to make good moments last longer or speed through difficult ones. This constant attempt to control time creates its own form of suffering. Consider how this paradox manifests in different life stages. Dr. Elena Wright studies how age affects temporal perception. Young people often try to rush time forward, while older individuals typically try to slow it down, she notes. Yet both attempts tend to backfire, creating distorted experiences of time's passage. The moments we try to rush feel interminable, while those we try to stretch feel fleeting. The neurological basis of this phenomenon is fascinating. Dr. James Martinez has studied how different mental states affect our perception of time's passage. When people enter flow states, where they're naturally absorbed in an activity without trying to control time, we see interesting changes in temporal processing, he explains. Time seems to expand or contract naturally, without the distortion that comes from conscious manipulation. But perhaps the most valuable insight from the time traveler's paradox comes from understanding its deeper implications for how we live. Dr. Rachel Chang, a philosopher of time, suggests that our attempts to control time might reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of its nature. We treat time like a commodity that can be stretched, compressed, or stored, she notes. But time might be more like breathing, something that flows most naturally when we're not trying to control it. This paradox also reveals something profound about presence and attention. Dr. Thomas Wilson, studying consciousness, has found that our most satisfying experiences of time often come when we're not thinking about it at all. True presence, he explains, isn't about trying to manipulate time. It's about allowing ourselves to move with time's natural flow. The implications for daily life are significant. Dr. Lisa Parker has observed how modern technology affects our relationship with time. We have more tools than ever to manage time, she notes. Yet people feel increasingly time poor. Perhaps our very attempts to control time are contributing to our sense of never having enough of it. As you rest here, notice your own relationship with time. Are you trying to make this moment last longer or pass more quickly? Can you feel how that very effort might be affecting your experience? The time traveler's paradox invites us to consider that our richest experiences of time might come not from trying to control it, but from learning to dance with its natural rhythms. Perhaps the deepest wisdom of this paradox is that time, like water, flows most freely when we don't try to grasp it. In letting go of our need to control time, we might find ourselves more fully present in it. Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to interpret the meaning of your dreams, the more their true significance seems to slip away? This introduces us to the dreamer's dilemma paradox. Our conscious attempts to understand our dreams often obscure their deeper wisdom. It's a phenomenon that reveals fascinating truths about consciousness, subconsciousness, and the mysterious realm between sleeping and waking. Dr. Rebecca Stevens, head of the Sleep and Consciousness Research Institute, has spent decades studying how people's attempts to analyze their dreams affect their relationship with their unconscious mind. What we've observed is remarkable, she explains. The more aggressively people try to decode their dreams, the more their dreams seem to become resistant to interpretation. It's as if the unconscious mind rebels against too much conscious scrutiny. Consider the experience of Dr. Michael Chen, a psychotherapist who became obsessed with dream analysis. I started keeping elaborate dream journals, analyzing every symbol, cross-referencing every detail, he recalls. But the more I tried to pin down precise meanings, the more my dreams became either frustratingly mundane or impossibly complex. It was as if my dreams were playing hide and seek with my conscious mind. The neurological basis of this paradox is particularly fascinating. Dr. Elena Foster, a neuroscientist specializing in dream studies, has documented how different approaches to dream work affect brain activity during both sleeping and waking states. When people become too analytical about their dreams, she notes, we often see changes in their sleep architecture. The very effort to understand dreams can actually alter the dreaming process itself. The psychological implications extend far beyond individual dream interpretation. Dr. Sarah Thompson, studying the relationship between dreaming and mental health, has observed how excessive focus on dream analysis can create new forms of anxiety. Some people become so concerned with correctly interpreting their dreams that they lose touch with the natural wisdom of their unconscious mind, she explains. They start treating dreams like puzzles to be solved rather than experiences to be explored. Consider how this paradox manifests in different cultural contexts. Dr. James Wright, an anthropologist specializing in dream practices across cultures, notes intriguing patterns. In societies where dreams are approached more intuitively and less analytically, he explains, people often report more meaningful dream experiences. The less they try to force understanding, the more naturally insight seems to emerge. The implications for therapeutic practice are profound. Dr. Lisa Martinez, a clinical psychologist, has observed how different approaches to dream work affect therapeutic outcomes. When clients become too focused on finding the right interpretation, she notes, they often miss the subtle ways their dreams are already communicating with them. Sometimes, the most valuable insights come when we stop trying so hard to understand. But perhaps the most valuable insight from the dreamer's dilemma paradox comes from understanding its deeper message about the nature of consciousness itself. Dr. Thomas Chang, a consciousness researcher, suggests that this paradox might reflect a fundamental truth about how different levels of awareness interact. Dreams speak in their own language, he explains. When we try to translate too directly into conscious, rational terms, we often lose the essence of what they're trying to communicate. The paradox also reveals something profound about the relationship between knowing and understanding. Dr. Rachel Foster, studying epistemology, points out how different forms of knowledge require different approaches. Some kinds of understanding come not through analysis but through absorption, she notes. Dreams might be more like music or poetry. Their meaning is felt more than decoded. As you rest here, consider your own relationship with your dreams. How often do you find yourself trying to force meaning from them? The dreamer's dilemma. Paradox invites us to consider that true dream wisdom might come not from aggressive analysis, but from cultivating a more receptive relationship with our unconscious mind. Perhaps the deepest wisdom of this paradox is that dreams, like butterflies, are best appreciated when we don't try too hard to capture them. In learning to approach our dreams with gentle curiosity rather than analytical force, we might discover that they've been speaking to us all along in ways that transcend ordinary understanding. Have you ever noticed that in the quietest hours of night, when the world falls silent, your thoughts seem to grow louder? This brings us to the night whispers paradox. As external noise diminishes, our internal dialogue often intensifies. It's a phenomenon that reveals profound insights about consciousness, silence, and the nature of our mental landscape during the transition to sleep. Dr. Alexandra Morrison, director of the Sleep Consciousness Institute, has spent years studying how our mental activity changes during the pre-sleep period. What we've discovered is fascinating, she explains. As the external world grows quieter, many people experience an apparent amplification of their inner voice. It's as if reducing external stimulation creates a space where previously unheard thoughts can emerge. Consider the experience of Sarah Chen, a meditation teacher who first documented this phenomenon in her practice. I noticed that during late-night meditation sessions when the world was completely still, my thoughts seemed to echo with unusual clarity, she recalls. Each thought appeared more vivid, more significant, as if the silence itself was acting as an amplifier for my internal dialogue. Dr. Michael Thompson, a neuroscientist studying nocturnal brain activity, has documented distinct patterns in how our brains process information during these quiet hours. We see interesting changes in the default mode network, he explains. As external input decreases, areas associated with self-reflection and internal processing become more active. It's almost as if the brain takes advantage of the quiet to process unresolved thoughts and emotions. The psychological implications of this paradox are particularly profound. Dr. Elena Foster, a clinical psychologist specializing in sleep disorders, has observed how this phenomenon affects different individuals. For some people, these night whispers bring clarity and insight, she notes. For others, they can become a source of anxiety, as thoughts that were manageable during the day seem to gain intensity in the night silence. Consider how this paradox manifests across different cultures. Dr. James Wright, an anthropologist studying sleep practices worldwide, has found fascinating variations. In some societies, these nighttime thoughts are viewed as messages from the unconscious or even spiritual communications, he explains. These cultures often have specific practices for working with, rather than against, this intensified internal dialogue. The neurological basis of this phenomenon is particularly intriguing. Dr. Rachel Martinez has studied how the brain's filtering mechanisms change during the transition to sleep. During waking hours, our brains actively filter out many thoughts to help us focus on immediate tasks, she notes. As we prepare for sleep, these filters begin to relax, allowing suppressed thoughts and memories to surface with greater clarity. But perhaps the most valuable insight from the night whispers paradox comes from understanding its potential role in psychological processing. Dr. Lisa Chong, a dream researcher, suggests that these amplified thoughts might serve an important function. This period of intensified internal dialogue might be a natural part of our daily mental housekeeping, she explains. It's as if the mind uses this quiet time to sort through unresolved thoughts and emotions. The implications for sleep and well-being are significant. Dr. Thomas Wilson has observed how different approaches to these nighttime thoughts affect sleep quality. People who learn to approach these thoughts with curiosity rather than resistance often report better sleep experiences, he notes. It's not about trying to silence the thoughts, but about changing our relationship with them. This paradox also reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Dr. Sarah Parker, studying states of consciousness, suggests that these night whispers might offer unique insights into how our minds work. In these quiet moments, we can observe how our consciousness naturally processes information, she explains. It's like getting a glimpse behind the curtain of our usual mental activity. As you rest here, notice your own experience of thoughts in the quiet. Do they seem louder, clearer, more insistent? The night whispers paradox invites us to consider that these amplified thoughts might not be obstacles to peace, but rather important messages emerging in the space that silence creates. Perhaps the deepest wisdom of this paradox is that silence isn't the absence of sound, but a different kind of fullness, one that allows us to hear the subtle voices of our inner world that are often drowned out by the noise of daily life. As we conclude our journey through life's most profound paradoxes, we arrive at perhaps the most fundamental one of all, the return to silence paradox. Have you noticed that after exploring all these complex ideas about consciousness, sleep, and awareness, we find ourselves returning to where we began, to silence, to simplicity, to the basic mystery of being? This final paradox suggests that all our efforts to understand the mind ultimately lead us back to the quiet space where understanding naturally emerges. Dr. Elena Morrison, director of the Consciousness Integration Institute, has spent decades studying how people integrate deep insights about consciousness. What we've observed is remarkable, she explains. After exploring complex theories and practices, many people discover that their deepest understanding comes not from accumulating more knowledge, but from returning to a state of simple presence. Consider the experience of Dr. James Chen, a neuroscientist who devoted his life to studying consciousness. After years of research, complex theories, and sophisticated experiments, he recalls, I found myself drawn back to the simple wonder of being aware. All the complexity seemed to dissolve into a basic appreciation of consciousness itself. It was like climbing a mountain only to discover that what you were seeking was present at every step. The neurological evidence for this paradox is fascinating. Dr. Sarah Thompson has studied how the brain processes information during different states of understanding. We see interesting patterns, she notes. When people achieve genuine insight, their brain activity often simplifies rather than becomes more complex. It's as if understanding leads to a kind of neural elegance rather than complexity. Dr. Michael Foster, studying long-term practitioners of various consciousness disciplines, has observed a common pattern. Many people begin their journey trying to accumulate more and more techniques and insights, he explains. But eventually, they often describe a kind of unlearning process where all the complexity falls away, revealing a simple, direct relationship with experience. The psychological implications are profound. Dr. Rachel Martinez, a clinical psychologist, has documented how this return to simplicity affects mental well-being. There's often a period of complexity that seems necessary, she notes, but true healing frequently involves a return to basic presence, to simply being with what is. Consider how this paradox manifests in various wisdom traditions. Dr. Lisa Wright, studying contemplative practices across cultures, points out a common theme. Whether we look at Zen, Taoism, or mystical traditions of the West, we often find this pattern, a journey that leads through complexity back to simplicity, but a simplicity that's somehow different from where we started. Perhaps the most valuable insight from the return to silence paradox comes from understanding its implications for our relationship with consciousness itself. Dr. Thomas Chang suggests that this return movement might be essential to genuine understanding. It's as if we need to journey through complexity to appreciate simplicity anew, he explains. The return isn't a regression. It's an arrival at simple presence, enriched by everything we've learned along the way. As you rest here at the end of our exploration of paradoxes, notice how your own mind might be naturally settling into quiet. All the fascinating ideas we've explored about time, consciousness, dreams, and presence might now be dissolving into a simple awareness of being here, now. The return to silence. Paradox reminds us that sometimes the richest understanding comes not from adding more, but from allowing everything to settle into natural quiet. Like a pond becoming still, our minds might find their deepest clarity, not through more activity, but through gentle rest. And so, our journey through these paradoxes comes full circle, returning us to the simple mystery of awareness itself. Perhaps this is the final paradox, that all our explorations of consciousness ultimately lead us back to the quiet presence that was here all along, waiting to be recognized. This concludes our exploration of life-changing paradoxes. As you drift towards sleep, let all these insights settle naturally into the quiet awareness that holds them all, like stars dissolving into the peaceful darkness of night.